Alright. Oh, cool. Alright, so we're going to start with pollution because that's the most tested section. I'll be on camera in a second. Alright, so you should have already done the, you had got this the first day. If you need another one, I got it. But you should have figured out which area you're weakest in. But remember that pollution is the most tested. So 25 to 30% of the exam is pollution. Okay? And you know what? I'm going to use my mic anyway. Is this going to cause feedback if I use my mic in addition? Okay. I'll be double mic'd. Should have worn something with the collar. This is so much better than other places where I couldn't talk loud enough for the whole class to hear. Okay, there we go. They can hear me. Alright, so 20 to 35% of the exam is spent studying pollution. Everybody can see this, right? Okay. I don't want that. Alright, so these are just vocab words. A toxin is anything that harms living things. It can be a chemical in the water, it can be a drug. Pretty much it can be anything. Anything in excess is going to be a toxin. So ash can be a toxin. Tylenol is actually very toxic. It doesn't have a lot to do with the environment. However, if you were to flush a bunch of... Recently there was a bad issue with Tylenol being out on the market, and there was some fungus that grew in it that reduced its effectiveness, and so they recalled Tylenols about a year ago for a couple months. It wasn't anything dangerous, like it didn't hurt anybody, but because it grew within the Tylenol manufacturing, they had to recall Tylenol. But Tylenol can be toxic if you take too much of it because it'll overload your liver. Any kind of hormones, endocrine disruptors, things like that, can be a toxic. So anything can harm living things. If you drink too much water, that can be toxic because it'll throw off your nitrogen and potassium balance, which causes your muscles not to contract properly, and the sodium, lack of sodium, will cause your brain not to work properly and stuff. So people, if they drink a lot of water, and I mean a lot, your brain will tell you to stop drinking water. But if you, for some reason, are doing something, somebody's forcing you to drink water, or you've taken some kind of medication where it's shut off that natural, thirst quenching part of your brain, it's gonna cause water to be toxic. Which reminds me, I've got to get you guys to sign this sheet. I'll send it around. Thank you. Alright, so toxicity is the amount of harm a toxin can cause relative to its dose. So obviously the toxicity of water is going to be very, 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 very low. And in reality, and this is just an aside, it has not much to do with environmental science, but aspirin, gram for gram, Tylenol, gram for gram, is more toxic than morphine, gram for gram. A lot of people didn't know that. So if you take 500 milligrams of aspirin and 500 milligrams of Morphine, if you live, the Tylenol is actually more toxic to your liver than the morphine is, but that's not that important. The important thing that you should know is if you go to CVS or Walgreens, they'll have a thing where you, if you're finished with your medications, they have a place where they um, not recycle it, but get rid of it. Most people, most of the time, up until about 5-10 years ago, they told you to um, just dump your old pills down the drain to get rid of them, so your kids wouldn't take your medications, or the dog wouldn't get new medications, things like that. Or a lot of medications, like especially antibiotics, will expire, and if you throw them down the toilet, then they're going to be released into the water system. And the way our water treatment plants, which we go over in a minute, we'll go over briefly, what way the water treatment plants work, it doesn't remove those types of toxins. It doesn't remove medications and poisons and stuff. And think about it, if you're throwing a bunch of antibiotics into the water because you didn't finish your antibiotics, or you think they expired or whatever, they're still working a little bit. But if you throw them in the environment, then you've got all these things that are killing off natural bacteria out in the environment, which can cause a big problem. Threshold dose is the amount of a toxin that begins to show a response in the organism. So the best way that I think of this is, how much aspirin do you need to start to get pain relief? Well, one regular strength aspirin in 50% of the population will begin to show pain relief. But for the majority of people, it's not a therapeutic dose, meaning it's not enough to take care of your pain. It's just enough to slightly affect it. Or if you think about a hormone or something that's been put into your environment, it's just the threshold dose. It's just the minimum amount to cause some kind of change or effect in the environment. Acute effect versus chronic effect. These are important. Acute means what happens all at once. Chronic means what happens over a long period of time. So my favorite way of thinking of this is an alcoholic. Not all the examples are environmental, but an alcoholic is a good way to think of acute versus chronic effect. So acute effect is response when an organism is exposed to a large amount of a toxin in a short period of time. Chronic effect is the response when an organism is exposed to a small amount of toxin for a long period of time. So your parents or grandparents, I'll give you a better example, more realistic, which I shouldn't be recording myself saying this, but say you go off to college, you're 21, and you go to a party, and you drink heavily one night. You wake up the next morning, you're hungover, you feel sick, you don't feel good. Hopefully that's all that happens. You can drink too much and actually go to the hospital and get alcohol poisoning. But in most cases, if you drink too much and you don't know what your limit is, you're going to get the acute effect of alcohol. So it's going to make you sick. It's going to give you a hangover. It may make you throw up. It'll make you groggy. You won't think straight. You'll want to stay in bed all day, and you just don't feel good. And it can actually make you depressed a little bit. Effect would be somebody who drinks 2 drinks a night, 2 or 3 cocktails a night, or glasses of wine, or vodka tonics or something like that, 3 a night for the past 20, 30 years, every single night, just as habit. They have a dinner or a drink with dinner, or they have a drink when they get home from work, they have a drink with dinner, they have one later on in the evening, a beer or something later on in the evening. If you drink that way for 20, 30 years, you're not going to get a hangover. You're not going to get any immediate effects that are negative. You'll wake up, you'll be fine the next day. But you can get the chronic effect, which is response when an organism is exposed to a small amount, in this case alcohol, for a long period of time. And both somebody who binge drinks or drinks a lot all at once and does it once in a while, 2, 3 times a month, versus somebody who has 3 drinks a day for 30 years, they're both considered alcoholics, believe it or not. And so you wouldn't think the latter, the chronic effect, where somebody's drinking 3 drinks a night for 30 years, is a bad thing, but that can actually cause worse problems than the acute effect. So you'll get liver cirrhosis, liver will die. You can get heart problems. You can get, my stepfather, for example, he's a recovering alcoholic. He drank red wine every night, and you think red wine's healthy. Well, it is in moderation, but he drank like a bottle of red wine every night. And, did it for, 20 years, and now his heart, something's wrong with his heart, and his heart won't beat properly. He has to be on a pacemaker. He has to take medication, both blood thinners and blood pressure medication, all these medications, because he drank so much for all his whole life. He didn't drink to get drunk. He just drank out of habit. So he'd drink a bottle of wine, which is probably about 5 glasses of wine a night, for 30 years. And now his liver's messed up, his heart's messed up, he's on antidepressants because it's a depressant. So acute would be all at once, chronic would be over a slow period of time. Environmental example would be, acute would be nuclear radiation. You clean up a nuclear power plant, you're going to get the acute effects of that radiation if you're not protected properly, and you'll die, within a day or two. Chronic effects, if you were to work at a power plant and you would get small doses of that radiation over a long period of time, you would eventually probably get things like cancer, different types of cancer, which would eventually kill you also. So one's short-term, one's long-term. And this is a dose response curve. Whereas the ED50 and the LD50, remember, all drugs and toxins both have an effective dose and a lethal dose. So this is the dose response curve for an analgesic effective morphine. Analgesic means pain relieving effective morphine. This is low amount of, I didn't write all of it in there, but this is the low amount of a drug, this is high amount of a drug. And this is the dose response curve for the depressive effects of morphine on respiration. So if you take enough morphine at one time, you're going to stop breathing. Your smooth muscles stop contracting. So this would be your ED50, effective dose 50. ED50 means effective dose 50. And this is your LD50, means lethal dose 50. So here, 50% of your population starts to feel the effects of morphine at this level. Here, 50% of your population starts to die because of too much morphine. And all toxins have that. So even, a good example would be even Tylenol has that. So Tylenol's effective dose is, for 50% of the population, would be one Tylenol pill, which is something like 500 milligrams. I'm guessing somewhere around 500 milligrams. Most of the time they tell you to take 2 Tylenol pills. That way it negates the 50%. If you double it, it's going to theoretically work for 100% of the population. So that's the analgesic effect of Tylenol, is 100 milligrams of Tylenol. So 50%, half of that, one Tylenol pill would give relief of pain to 50% of the population. 2 Tylenol pills would give relief to potentially 100% of the population. That's why they ask you on the bottle, they say, please take 2 Tylenol every 6 hours for pain. So your ED50 is when 50% of that is happening. And you might have to be able to interpret this. So up here, when it gets to around high, this would be about 100%. This is when people are taking 2 Tylenol pills. Now, if you go and you increase Tylenol to 4,000 milligrams, mind you,